It seems like every year it just gets harder and harder to be a landlord.
The timing of now limiting the rent increases after what apartment owners have gone through with multiple years of no rent increases.
The LA County Board of Supervisors voted unanimously to extend a local rent relief.
When the city of LA extended the eviction moratorium one more year after the state, almost zero compensation for apartment owners. In the RSO, it says reasonable return for apartment owners. Well, we have not had reasonable returns for multiple years. Never mind all the increase in expenses, that 100 to 200% increases in insurance.
Waste, water, power, everything has gone up significantly more than you can raise the rent.
Right. The question is whether it will convince the politicians to rethink what they have done.
Welcome to No Vacancy, where I share conversations with LA's top multifamily owners, investors, and visionaries. I'm your host, Taylor Avakian, the founder of the group CRE, and I specialize in the sale of apartment buildings in Los Angeles. On this show, we cut straight to what matters, market insights and real-world strategies straight from LA's multifamily icons to help you navigate one of the most complex real estate markets in the world, Southern California. Enjoy.
Welcome to the podcast. My name is Taylor Avakian, and my esteemed guest who knows everything about affordable housing in Southern California, Dan Tenenbaum, is here to tell us about everything. He was actually on the inside of the city and dealt with the city council and worked on some boards and governments, and so he's going to tell us all about that. Dan, thank you for being here.
Glad to be here. There are better affordable housing specialists than me, but maybe not ones that only manage and own market rate apartments. So that'll be my niche.
Yeah, exactly. So tell me about that. So walk me through a little bit, just to give the listeners a little bit of background. Like, you're from Montreal originally. You came here to Southern California, and how did the apartments acquisitions come, and then how did you get into the affordable housing?
Sure. So, I moved here in 1992, so it's been quite a while.
Okay, so you're LA native.
Yeah, and if you come from Montreal, the weather aspect is an important part, but the other part actually was the entrepreneurial opportunity to start off in a new place and kind of feel like it's an environment where you may not know as many people, but that if you can make things happen and you can do something. And in fact, so in that way, the American dream and the California dream, I've really been able to benefit from that. And my first acquisition is back in 1995.
You came here to buy buildings.
I came here to start a business. I didn't know what that business was going to be like. And it started off with me and a few friends just buying a small 14-unit apartment building in Burbank that we still own.
Wow.
Putting my $50,000 in savings, which was most of my liquidity at the time, after graduating from business school and moving out here without a job. So 3 years after arriving, I bought the first building and did that on the side while I was working for Disney. And that ended up becoming the business. I didn't know that. I thought it was just going to be an investment at the time, but that became my focus. And we got investors and started growing. And then I became basically a real estate syndicator where we're buying larger and larger apartment buildings. And eventually I gave notice to Disney and has been doing this full time since 1998.
Wow. Okay. So from 94 to 98 is when you grew the portfolio. And how big did the portfolio become?
During that time when I was still fully employed.
Yeah.
I think we had purchased 4 buildings at that time.
Okay.
And I gave notice when we got loan approval on the 5th. So at the time, if I'm doing my math correctly, about 80 units across 4 buildings while I was at Disney. And then when I got loan approval for a 76-unit building further west in the valley in Tarzana, that's when I gave notice and been doing that ever since.
Was it enough money with 5 buildings where you could live, or was it like, okay, this is just enough, but now I got to go buy more to be able to afford the fees? And, because if you're doing syndication full time, like, you don't see a lot of money for the first couple of years, typically. So did you have enough money to survive?
Well, I had the benefit because I syndicated the deals. I was also the property manager. So the property management fees carried me over to help me pay the rent for my 1-bedroom apartment. I was working out of a breakfast nook in that in that one bedroom apartment. So yeah, no, I mean, I had low expenses at the time as I was growing it. I had, very little support other than a part-time bookkeeper, and some managers that I'd hired, that were offsite, not working with me in my apartment. So yeah, I had to have low expenses, and that's how it started. But yeah, no, I was thankfully the management fees helped carry over that allowed me, and I've always tried to be in a position where I didn't have to buy deals just to have income coming in, and that's where the management fees have always come in. We've always self-managed to this day.
Yeah,
and it helps. So it creates a discipline that where it may be tempting just to go out and buy further buildings just to create fees and increase business revenues and stuff like that. And that was I've always been disciplined in just purchasing things I really believed in.
Where were the first investors that you got to help invest?
So, I mean, it's a story of you never know who would be your investors, or how random things could happen. But it literally was on a plane from Montreal to Los Angeles, where I just was being social. I recognized a guy who I knew lived in LA. He was an actor who lived in LA from Montreal, who was in my younger brother's grade. And that's about all I knew about the guy. I said hello. We ended up chatting for a while and sitting next to each other on the plane. And turns out his father had an investor group actually in Montreal who they invested in real estate, and that I should maybe try to call them and see if they might be interested. And so I followed up with them, and the next time I was in Montreal, I showed them a potential type of deal that I was seeing at those days, and I presented all to strangers basically.
Wow.
Around the boardroom, about 5 different bunch of friends. And I said, well, if I could bring you this kind of a deal in the future with these kinds of returns, and this is the strategy. And at the time it was, around the studios and explaining what the long-term benefit of doing that would be. And they went around the boardroom table, and each said that they were interested one by one. And I still remember to that day. Wow. Okay. I just raised my first amounts of money, and that was just the beginning of a long-term relationship with those folks. And of course I've grown it ever since, but those same groups and now families are still very involved with a lot of our investments after all these years.
That's crazy. On an airplane, man, you never know. Sometimes I'm like, I put my headphones on and I'll listen to a podcast or movie, but sometimes I tell myself, shoot, I should try to talk to people on here, because you never know.
You never know where, especially when you're just getting started, you have to kind of keep all the options open.
You got to make things happen. You got to be, network is huge. And so, okay, so 95, you do this, or 98, you do this full-time?
Full-time 98, yeah.
And so from 98 till, tell me, to today, like, what did the portfolio growth look like? What was the trajectory there?
We've kind of ebbed and flowed. So we bought buildings as large as 170 units, where we bought another one that was about 78 units, almost next door. So, in Canoga Park, so almost like a 250 unit complex that we were owning and operating. So at that time, we probably got up to 800 or so units, and
wow.
And now we're down more into the 500s. So I've always kept it a medium size.
Mm-hmm.
Try just kind of medium size, that it, you always have employee issues on the property manager side, but it seems to be easier to manage and still large enough to get quality people to manage the properties and maintenance, full-time maintenance that allows you to be more directive and control, what goes on to have higher quality service to the residents.
That's awesome. So then walk me through how you became part of this affordable housing, how you became part of Los Angeles affordable housing community, because you eventually ended up working for HACLA, right? The city of Los Angeles. And so walk me through how that happened.
So, it really started in a major way when I was appointed by Mayor Garcetti to become a commissioner for the Housing Authority for the city of Los Angeles. So that's the agency that oversees all the public housing, but also the whole Section 8 program for the city of Los Angeles. So that was the part of what I've done that probably had the largest impact on affordable housing. But I had been already involved with various homelessness organizations as the kind of quote unquote landlord advisor. As you probably know, there's these different nonprofits, Path, Brilliant Corners, etc., that now have established programs for what they call scattered site placement of homeless. That means basically they put in could be one individual in a market rate apartment building, and without any specific services offered on site, but they would provide the social services to them, scattered sites. So they go from one building to the next. Mm-hmm. But basically, we would get at market rents from them, and high security deposits, etc. So I was the one who was, and there were other apartment owners as well that said, you need to have much higher security deposits if you're going to convince apartment owners to house the homeless who are market rate apartments. You need to be able to be aggressive on the rents to convince them. You need to have one phone number to call if there's a problem. So just those kinds of examples of quick approval process and payment to secure the apartment. And so all of these kinds of factors that went into helping them put their programs together, make them landlord friendly. I was part of that.
And then that led to Garcetti. Do you have to like run for that position, or did they?
It's an appointment. It's an appointment.
Okay.
I think they saw that because I was involved with landlord stuff, because I was been involved with civic things in Boyle Heights. We can talk about that a little later if about this large historical synagogue that we're redeveloping for the benefit of the local Latino population over in Boyle Heights. They saw that I was not necessarily just a landlord who doesn't care. I'm someone who was put in the time and effort who cares about the community, and frankly, when you have to convince apartment owners to accept Section 8, and you need to be able to be a landlord to thousands of public housing residents, it's very good for the city to have someone with the expertise of owning and operating multifamily housing.
Totally. I think that's how a lot of it should be is, hey, the private sector tends to understand a little bit more about how to get shit done, if you know what I mean, and understands the nuances and running these businesses and these buildings because they do it on a daily basis. Like that is their profession. So I agree with you on that. And then obviously this was what time frame were you the head of commissioner?
So about, let's say, I want to say 2016 to 2022.
Okay. So. And what were the initiatives during that time period? Because the reason I ask is if from outside people looking into Los Angeles, right, and all the news outlets and everywhere, Los Angeles they got a homeless problem or they got crazy high sky rents. Like it's just doom and gloom. Everyone shits on California. Like what was the internal discussion when you guys were there, and what was the issues you were trying to solve, and what were some of the things that you guys implemented to try to help some of that?
Yeah, well, first of all, I mean, objectively, we have a significant major problem that everyone recognizes, whatever your political stripes are, that it's bad. Having said that, they're actually, for the last 3 or 4 years, we've been housing more people than we ever have. So it's that people are still falling into homelessness. So, we can talk about some of the efforts that if these efforts had not occurred, as bad as things are, things would be worse.
Yeah.
So
tell me about that.
And we don't want, that's kind of almost unimaginable because there's probably very few communities within the city and adjacent counties, etc., that are not impacted by homelessness. Totally. So imagine it being worse. Well, at least so that's the good news. It's not worse, but yeah. So the one of the main initiatives related to homelessness that the Housing Authority got involved with, and that I was, much more involved with as a board member. And again, a board member is just overseeing, a large organization and trying to provide feedback and direction. The main thing was the acquisition program and specifically the Project Homekey acquisitions. So the way that worked is during COVID, the governor, one of actually his most innovative programs, I think in general, was that he provided the opportunity to purchase brand new buildings or existing buildings that are vacant, or which hotels and motels can be more easily made vacant, or at that time, a lot of people were not staying in hotels and motels, so those were available too, to acquire them and use those properties to house the homeless. And what we saw was the benefit of that in terms of, because they had to be readily available and vacant as a criteria to be able to house people right away, that became a creative sense of urgency. And the fact that a lot of the development, that typical development of affordable housing requirements were not necessary. We could buy from anyone, from a market rate developer who was just finishing, who had planned on renting it to the general public. But we were, as a housing authority, were able to purchase. And we were able to purchase over 2,000 apartment units over 2 years.
Wow.
Over, I forget how many transactions, but, 30-something transactions, including hotels and motels, including brand new apartment buildings. But the average cost per unit was less than $400,000.
Mm-hmm.
Now, compared to what it is for the normal pathway towards affordable housing in our state, which is $750,000 to $850,000 per unit. So that I'm super proud of. I'm proud of HACLA to have been able to do that. I'm also proud that they have also put money where their mouth is when they have their own money to be used, and that because the housing authority gets management fees or asset management fees for overseeing non-public housing, but still affordable units. They use some of those funds to actually acquire existing apartment buildings and put a covenant on those, and then provide Section 8 vouchers for those tenants. So that there's an acquisition program outside of the Project Homekey that still exists, and we've seen quite a few transactions that you know some of them.
Yeah.
Some quite large ones, and it's the cost per unit is significantly lower because they're existing units. So just by definition, like in the regular market, those sell for less, and it's certainly less than the brand new affordable, quote unquote, affordable units that are coming on board. And so this is a result of a trade-off, and the trade-off is the existing affordable housing, requires significant long-term costs and financing through this very formal process of multiple applications. It takes a long time, huge legal costs. And then once you're done with that, then you have all these other additional costs that occur. There are, all the costs related to environmental costs, all the labor requirements. And so when you add up a lot of those other costs, it's the administrative, the legal, the length of time it takes for approval, all of those things, that's so much cost, it almost doubles the cost of affordable housing. And so the housing authority was able to prove out this different model. And it's a model that I think we need as a state and as a city and as a county. We need to consider what are the trade-offs we are making by saying, hey, we need to have, these environmental requirements on any affordable unit. We need to make sure that we have prevailing wage on any project that has affordability. Well, that's a choice. And so, these are well-intended choices. Does anyone necessarily think that we shouldn't have good environmental buildings, or should we not pay people, a great salary so that they can support their families? I mean, well-intended, but we have to make a decision, and there are trade-offs. And the trade-off here is that if we really believe that we need to, that we have a homeless and a housing affordability crisis, then we have to prioritize. And I think we have just demonstrated examples of what the city and the state need to start considering that no matter what upzoning we do in the city, if it costs too much, or I would go beyond just upzoning, even if you speed up the approval process, if these other costs are too significant, then they don't get built.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the problem that we have now. That is a problem that the state has. That's a problem the city of LA has. And so if we're going to keep doing the same thing, we're going to get the same results. The ED1 is a great initiative by the mayor. It's speeding up the process. But if all these other requirements either are put back, or as some of these labor requirements, I understand, are coming back for even ED1, and we're getting back to the same place. So we have to really start prioritizing housing, and that means sometimes it means maybe disappointing some other groups who are pushing for other things.
Why are they building brand new housing? For example, the one in Santa Monica that they came out and estimated it was going to cost $1 million per unit to build. Why are they doing that instead of taking the existing properties or buying them from market owners and then converting them into housing?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, the benefit of a brand new building is the same benefit as Project Homekey, which was you get a bunch of units, you get the 100% of the units at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
The benefit of buying an existing apartment building with people who are eventually going to move out, or a good chunk of them, even a rent control building over 5 years will probably have about 3/4 of the residency move out, is that there's cash flow for the investor. So there is a pathway, frankly, for a different way of doing it. It does take longer because you have to rely on turnover, and certainly there's not going to be any government agency who's going to try to force anyone out just to put in a new affordable unit.
Buyouts or anything like that.
Yeah, but yes, that's another great model to do it, or they can incent the private market to do it. And there's some incentives with property tax abatement and things like that for that. But it's, if it was strong enough, we would see that as a much more prevalent tool, but it's still in a limited usage. The market's very efficient. So there's a program that makes things worth it for developers, whether it's affordable housing developers or market rate, to do something people figure out right away. So, and vice versa, when there's impediments, if you're not seeing things being built, there's a reason. So you need to look inward, and that's what we need to do as a state. With regards to housing, we need to look inward. We need to say, we've done all of these things. The state, frankly, has been very aggressive. It's not just the ADUs. They've increased all kinds of ways to avoid local jurisdictions from impeding housing production, and yet it's still not happening. And so we need to continue to look inward and saying, okay, well, maybe we're trying to please too many different groups at the same time. If we really have a housing crisis, let's focus on lowering the cost so that more can be built.
And you are on the board, I believe, of the California Apartment Association?
Yes. So I kind of have that interesting, very involved with a nonprofit, but I'm also representing basically the most significant, probably in the country, lobby group for housing.
Yeah.
And let me just say that as someone who sees both sides, I will tell you that not only is the CAA a super sophisticated group, as we just saw with the no on Proposition 34 33 win, and the yes on 34 win. Yeah. So I mean, just very sophisticated group. What's amazing to me, what's surprising maybe for others, and I'm still in amazement, is as you speak to the elected officials at the state level, the vast majority of whom are Democrats, they will describe the people representing California Apartment Association as a great resource for them. They are seen not as this radical, selfish, right-wing, landlord group that doesn't understand the local, the fact that there's an affordability issue, the fact that larger cities are very tenant dominated, and those need to be considered. So what they see is what I see, is that it's a group that's understands the environment, is working in the environment, has empathy towards the affordability situation, but also does a good job representing landlords. And as bad as some things have been, at the state level, especially during COVID, things would have been a lot worse without CAA representing them.
And what is your role there at this time, at least? Is it because of your experience with the public housing that they're bringing you on to kind of be this bridge to communication and understanding, hey, here's what's going on, here's what all the owners are dealing with, like, let's figure out a solution to solve both of our problems? Is that kind of what I imagine, or is it a little different?
It's different. I was involved with CAA even before I got on the HACLA board, so I've just been involved for a long time. And but I think because it's so involved in the legislation, so I'm on the legislative committee where, yes, I'm involved with, especially, I mean, when we take positions on every single bill that comes out of either the Assembly or the state Senate. So everything that comes out of Sacramento, we're taking a position. So we either, we support it, we're against it, or we're neutral on it. But our board is what it takes a position on that, and that's what the legislative committee does. I particularly get involved with affordable housing legislation and making recommendations to our group about that. So there is some aspect of the affordable stuff, but at the end of the day, I'm just interested in that confluence of our market rate developers and owners with public policy.
So there's a problem that California has, and you are very much intertwined in terms of getting the top level people and the government and the city discussing solutions. What are some innovative strategies or ways that they're approaching it? Or how do you see a way for us to fix some of the issues that we're having as a state and a city of LA?
Well, I think we have to look what the impediments are. What are the, the issue of needing to build in general has been on the front burner for probably about a decade.
Why can't we build? Why won't they let us?
So it goes back to what we said before. I mean, there are interest groups who want to make sure that labor costs, labor gets paid a certain level, the environmental requirement, all of these things and frankly, the whole state process of that I think most people would agree that the state process for affordable housing is antiquated, too bureaucratic, takes too long, and is a beast. And there's a whole huge industry set up for it, and there's a lot of barriers to entry, frankly, because you have to, once you figure out the rules, you're in and you know how to do it. But if you're not, if you're a market rate developer, it's not like you could just easily switch into affordable. It's a whole new financing system. It's a whole new bureaucratic system. There's a whole bunch of increased legal costs. So that needs to be worked on. The state, I think they know it, but they have to prioritize it. Well, that's okay. You know it. Well, let's put some action behind it. And then going back to those other costs. Yeah, we have to lower the cost because the upzoning that we're doing here in the city and the state, the ADUs is a great example of doing something new, and it's super successful. Mm-hmm. We need to be doing much, more significant, no more business as usual. And once there's enough people who believe that and they make it happen, I think we'll see a lot more units being built, and we have to build more affordable units that are, affordable from the beginning.
So capital A, affordable.
Yeah. I mean, because what if we, if we just build more units, which is part of the problem, think about all the people who are in roommate situations. As the rents go down, well, they'll just, instead of two people in one unit, the rents will go, oh, okay, I can afford that now. So the demand is like, could be made up, just by having more units that, or people will move to LA that might not have moved otherwise. So the people who are really at the bottom rung, they're not necessarily benefiting from that. So we'll need to create affordable housing that are, on title for 55 years. That needs to be a priority. That's the good part about ED1, because that's what it will create. That's the good thing about the HACLA acquisition program, because they're going to be put these covenants on after acquiring. We need to do more of that in addition to more supplies.
So that's interesting. So you're saying that even if, because I think they came out, the city says we're short 400,000 units. You're saying that even if we had magically 400,000 units that were built in the city, that the people who need or that they're trying to fill those units with would be taken out, would be filled by either current tenants who are splitting rent in the city, or people from out of state who then can now afford to come in, who aren't necessarily that capitally affordable.
And what about, younger people or sometimes older people who are living at home?
Yeah,
with their parents. So those people will leave too. So there's an elasticity of that market rate group that needs to be considered. Where it's not in a vacuum. So you don't just benefit. It doesn't just benefit the people at the lower rung just because you create more units. You need to be more thoughtful and very specific about creating affordable housing in addition to market rate. It's not you can't solve the problem just with doing one of those two.
Got it. There has to be a program in place. That's very interesting. I don't think a lot of people talk about that, how just because because people say, like Argentina, how it went from, that's more on the rent control side, but they went from highly rent controlled to not rent controlled at all, and their rents came down 30%, right? Like, that's something that a lot of apartment owners and people who stand up for apartments will point to and say, hey, look, this is why some of these programs and policies that we have in place on the surface may look great, but actually in reality, the psychology of humans and the way that the macroeconomic factors work, like, it's not actually getting us to our goal. Which is so very interesting to me.
Although I will say that I think the story is more complicated than at first blush with Argentina.
Oh, really?
Yeah. No, I think part of what happened was that there were owners, because the rent control laws were so egregious, that were so restrictive, they chose not to rent them out.
Oh, so like New York.
Right. And so that was part of the reason why the rents went down. They were off the market. They weren't actually leasing, even though they were vacant. And so, yes, so that's not necessarily the case here. We have a pretty low vacancy.
Which is crazy how Prop 33 even had legs to begin with, because that would have done exactly that, which has happened in New York City in 2009 when they passed that bill. Now, I don't know the exact number of units that are off the market, but when you have vacancy control and you have a tenant paying $700 and then you can raise it to $730, like, it just makes more sense to close the doors and not rent it out, right? And it's only going to exacerbate the issue.
That's right. That would be, and frankly, I mentioned I'm from Montreal. They have a major housing supply issue, even worse there.
Really?
Because they have that, super restrictive rent control laws. And so, so they have, they have a major affordability problem, even though the cost of living is lower, wages are lower too. And so, it's very difficult to get an apartment there as a result. And, people are, or they don't, their buildings aren't taken care of very well and they're degraded.
Can we talk about ULA?
Oh, yes.
Tell me about, first, tell the people who don't know, what is ULA, and then give me your thoughts on it.
Well, was it 2 years ago that Measure ULA passed? It was dubbed the mansion tax
in the city of LA.
And so I think a lot of people thought, oh yeah, all those wealthy people, when they sell their mansion, they're going to make money anyway, so let them pay a tax, right? Most of the people who are voting don't have mansions and never think that they're ever going to vote. So why not vote for that and be able to help fund programs for the homeless, which is where the money, or preventing homeless, where the money's going. So again, well-intended, I think, like a lot of these things, by people who you would enjoy talking to. I know some of them, nice people. So it's not a question of bad intention. The problem with Measure ULA is obviously in our industry, in the apartment industry, it's a huge disincentive, and we knew it when it passed. But now, my friend Mott Smith just did an analysis, and it's if you compare even apartment buildings that over 5 million, which is what's the first threshold for the tax to kick in, versus apartments that were below that threshold, even within the same industry, the reduction in number of sales since that passed for the threshold over 5 million, for those sales plummeted compared to the others that kind of were more in line with historical trends. And so yes, it's a disaster, and it's a disaster because it doesn't take into consideration the profits. Number one, it's just based on the selling price. So if you're a developer, just to use easy numbers, you build something for $9 million that you're going to sell for $10 million after you complete it. Well, the tax is based on a $10 million cost. It doesn't look at the $1 million, and that makes that developer say, when they're choosing to whether they're going to be building in the city of LA or elsewhere, say, it doesn't pencil out anymore. I don't have enough. There's not enough of a
Spread.
profit to justify the risk of me signing a personal guarantee with me and my family. I mean, people underestimate what developers need to put up, and the risk is not just themselves, and it's not just this corporation. No, the lenders can go after you personally, can go after your personal house. That and we probably all know some people where that has actually happened. It's not just stories. This actually happens, and so what happens is that as we don't get the development we need, and where we were just talking about how we need development, Measure ULA is a disaster because while it does raise some funds, and frankly, we've had some tenants that have benefited and we were able to keep because of the funds that help them get. I'm all in favor of the uses of the funds, but if it's having a detrimental effect on the development of housing in general, that's just terrible long term, and it doesn't benefit the people. When rents keep going back up higher, and even more people fall into homelessness because of.
Is there an alternative? Like, what's the solution for? Clearly, we need, or the city wants to raise more funds to help pay for some of these things, and clearly, Project Homekey seemed to be a success. And so, if you can use the funds to go and do something similar to what you guys did with Homekey, that seems like a logical place to use those funds. But if it takes away from the available units for even market rate people, so that affordable people can move into some of these other older buildings, like, what is the solution for us to solve the issue without taxing people more?
Yeah, I mean, if the idea of taxing, if it's, we've been paying transfer taxes, for instance, since you and I have been in the business, right?
It's like half percentage.
It's reasonable, right? So,
Yeah.
But if you're going to do a significant transfer tax, it needs to be based somehow, especially when it comes to multifamily business, where it's not just a business, it's creating homes, and that's the number one issue that people in California have about living in the state is the cost of housing. So if you're putting policy together, you need to be super sensitive to it, and if you're going to tax it based on some reasonable amount, number one, and reasonable profits. So yeah, and just in taxes in general, people need to see the benefits of it. So if it's working and it's actually preventing homelessness, and the landlords are receiving rents that they wouldn't otherwise, that could be a win-win. So, to me, in and of itself, if it's crafted properly, something similar could work, and both, yes, there is a higher tax, but it's also benefiting the housing provider community. I think that could be there's probably a reasonable way to do that.
How do you feel about the city council and some of the decisions that they've been seeming to make in terms of making it either more restrictive in terms of rent increases, which I know the county came out and changed the amount that you can raise the rent based 2/3 on the CPI for rent control units versus built before 1995. And then recently I've heard that the city is making a push to convert all buildings to electric appliances and electric. And then also they're considering reducing some of the rent increases and changing up the formula to calculate how much you can increase the rents and things like that. Which on the surface, obviously we want to make housing more affordable, but how do you feel about the city council and the decisions that they're making, or some of these bills they're trying to get passed?
Well, I mentioned I've been involved with the California Department of Assistance for many years. So I've been reviewing, and we've been taking positions on city of LA proposed changes to all kinds of issues that affect apartment owners. And the way I would summarize, maybe 20 years of my first 20 years is that they would pass legislation that would make the landlord community unhappy and the tenant community unhappy. And we kind of moved on, and no one was really happy. And as a politician, you probably can pat yourself on the back because that's probably the best you're going to get.
Yeah.
Especially in a market where a lot of the electorate are tenants. So to me, things have consistently moved more pro-tenant, but it was kind of balanced and reasonable. Ever since COVID, it has not been. It has been bashing landlords. It has made, the housing providers no longer a partner with the city, but as an antagonist, almost like they have an antagonist view of apartment owners, whether they do or not. That's the result of this legislation, and so it's been really, really tough, and it's no longer balanced. And unfortunately, I do have a chance to meet with city council members, and I had the opportunity to meet with Nithya Raman, who's the council member, who's the head of the housing committee currently of the city council, and I explained to her and to others is we are not Scandinavia. We are not a place where they have significant amount of government funds to handle a lot of these problems. A lot of the problems for affordability and homelessness will come as a partnership with a private market. The private market is now alienated. It's alienated now. This Measure ULA, is not as noticeable now because development is down, but it's down nationwide. But when things pick up, it's still going to be down here unless we get rid of that or change that measure. And so the balance is no longer there. Just at this point, after what apartment owners have gone through with COVID, with multiple years of no rent increases, where people forget, and I don't even think I've read it anywhere. When the city of LA extended the eviction moratorium one more year after the state, there was zero or almost zero compensation for apartment owners. There wasn't zero, but it was very, very limited, and there was zero state funds. So whereas maybe during the initial years of the eviction moratorium, we were getting 33 cents on the dollar, we got zero on the dollar for the final year. So that was just, to me, made things very difficult for owners.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if that is the case, that's okay. We recognize that, you as apartment owners, if I'm the city council, you've really had a tough time. The timing of now limiting the rent increases is not a good timing at this point. To relook at an RSO that has been in place since October 1st, 1978, that was designed to have, in the RSO, it says reasonable return for apartment owners. Well, we have not had reasonable returns for multiple years. Never mind all the increase in expenses including 100 to 200% increases in insurance, some city-led increases in refuse,
waste, water, power,
exactly.
You name it. Everything has gone up significantly more than you can raise the rent.
Right. So there's there has not been a reasonable return for many years. So to start thinking about it now, I just think it's really bad timing. The good news is I don't think they're in a rush to get that passed just yet, and that we're going to make it clear that the timing is not bad. The actual losing the floor from 3% to 2%, yeah, I don't think that would be appropriate at all. One of the difficulties, I should say, is that if they're really, the intent was to have a reasonable return. Remember 1978, when this was first passed, the rent control, it was sky high inflation. So it's not like it was in this much higher than today. So it's not like it was established and the words reasonable return were in a vacuum that's, it's not the same as this. No, it's exactly, if not worse than it is today. They thought even that time they needed to have a reasonable return because you need to be able to maintain the housing stock, the quality of the housing stock in our city. And so that's the reason, and that reason still pertains. And so to decrease it to 2% when but based on the CPI, where the CPI does not necessarily and often doesn't mimic the costs for apartment owners. Unfortunately, there's not this other index that's easily accessible that we may be able to suggest as an alternative. But really, the 3% kind of says, okay, well, even if inflation goes below 3%, we're going to still allow a 3% floor. It's kind of recognizing, okay, maybe the CPI is not the best gauge. Let's, make sure that at least they get 3% every year. So I think that's, that's not a good thing. The bank with their 5% increase as a max, but banking the difference of the CPI. So you'll be able to, let's say, if it was 7% this inflation in 1 year, but you can only do 5%, that 2% can carry over. That one, I have a more open mind.
Mountain View, and I know in Northern California, there's a couple of cities that do the banking, Mountain View being one of them, which is obviously near Google and Apple and stuff like that. So Culver City has their own, I think, rent control policies. They have their own ULA stuff, which seems to be working out pretty well. I saw a detailed breakdown of that. My concern, and I get this question a lot from not only owners, but people friends, family, they're like, are you sure you want to be dealing and selling properties in Los Angeles? Because it seems like every year it just gets harder and harder and tougher to be a landlord, and disincentivizing investment in the city, like these new laws, these new rules. I get a new email every week from HACLA or CAA saying this new ordinance is, it just keeps getting worse and worse. So like, do you see the city as an owner and someone who deals with that, do you see it getting to a point where it just becomes unreasonable to want to invest or own property in this city? Or does it have to flip? Does something have to flip and we have to go in the other direction? Or you have to hit rock bottom before people realize you can't keep doing this?
I think it's the last one.
Really?
Unfortunately. So I do think that at the end of the day, the incentives, if things get as bad, I think things will get worse before they get better. And the question is whether it will convince the politicians to rethink what they have done. Now, we are seeing San Francisco, elect a more centrist mayor, and so even in California, we're starting to see people who are getting tired about some of these business as usual types of things where, if you don't consider the backbone of the business community or the housing community, if you just forget them, eventually things get bad enough, which is what happened in San Francisco, where people push back, and it may take that. I'm not sure. I'm hoping it won't, and that's why I keep getting out there and talking to the elected officials who will meet with us, and at least give them perspective that just so we may be looking back at 2024 as the low rent years, and you're so trying to focus on getting affordable housing. This it may be getting much worse than this. So just so it's you need to have this. Go back to the balance. Go back to this, to the situation where you're helping tenants, but at the same time you're making sure that it's not detrimental to the housing supply and to the partners that you need to be with, the housing providers, to enact a lot of these affordable housing and housing general policies.
You're an owner. Do you want to invest more in LA?
I am more hesitant now than I ever have, to be honest. It's
really,
yeah, it's hard, and I love the city.
Yeah,
so it's hard for me.
It's just so frustrating when people who do good work and are someone who's example as yourself of like you've done your civil duty and like have tried to help a lot of these issues, and even you are like, oh, come on, man, like this, you don't even want to invest in the city that obviously you've come to and is trying to make great. And it's very sad. And I really hope that things can change a little bit. I want to talk about something, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, right? But I've heard this go around and it's interesting. And it's just like, So I don't know when this started, but the city of LA makes all landlords register their rents, right? So you have to say what your rents are for the city. Not me, but people have said that one of the reasons that they want to do that is because eventually they want to get to a point where the city owns a significant portion of the apartment buildings and units, where it's government controlled, basically apartment buildings, because it doesn't make sense for private individuals to own the assets. So they can get the prices down to a place where they purchase it from owners or investors, or take it over, whatever it is. And then it becomes government subsidized, government controlled housing, because they know what all the rents are for people, right? They can control, they know how much people, they don't know the expenses necessarily, but they know they can underwrite every building, basically, per se, right? Do you think that there's any ulterior motives within the city for wanting to eventually get to a place where they own more and more and more of these units?
No.
I
think that's a conspiracy.
Okay. All right.
Honestly, that's,
Why do you think they make you register the rents?
Well, I think, like a lot of these things, they looked at other cities and they say, oh, they're registering the rents. I'm sure that we can avoid excessive rent increases of bad actors, bad landlords who increase it significantly. The whole thing to me is a little, I mean, how are they using it? It's not clear. If there is, they are not, as far as I know, and maybe they are, but I've never heard anyone getting flags saying, hey, in your 2022 rent registry, you had this rent, and we see it's the same tenant in there in 2023, and their rent is 10% higher. So can you please justify or explain what happened there? I don't think that's happening. That's the way, if you're going to do the program, that's the way it should work.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think, they don't have the funding. The housing department probably doesn't have the funding. I think the way things work is the politicians get the idea, and the housing department tries to do what they can, to the minimum they can, just to comply. But if they don't get the funding to actually monitor it, I don't think anyone is. I mean, what I do know is if there is a complaint of an excessive rent increase, they will send out a letter to investigate it. They don't rely at all on, they don't think they go back to the rent registry for it. They still require the landlord just to respond. That's the way it should be. And I'm not sure who is protecting it. It's created, again, an example of you create a bureaucracy for apartment owners, make it more difficult. We have to, in January, we have to fill in all these, the whole.
And you pay for it too.
Yeah. So that's an excessive, to me, an example. If they're going to do it, let them do it, but don't do it and create this bureaucracy and not use it in a way that actually protects the people that they're supposed to protect.
Mm-hmm.
Let them actually use the data.
Yeah, exactly.
And then at least I feel like, okay, it's worthwhile. Now I feel like it's really just kind of sitting there. Everyone feels good because they can tell other cities, look, we have a rent registry. They can tell the tenant groups, we have a rent registry. And then, so what?
It's interesting. City of Santa Monica actually publishes theirs publicly, right? So they publish it online. I'm curious to know, if the city published it online, if that would be a good thing or a bad thing. Which, do you know much about Santa Monica? And obviously Santa Monica is not in the brightest of lights in terms of the public perception of how they're doing with housing and the homelessness and things like that. But it's interesting to know if there was a public opening up of, the details, if that would change behaviors and or anything like that.
I'm not sure. I think it's going to be, it probably, opens up a whole, another ball of wax, where if the housing department was fully staffed to that because it can be, someone could independently, especially if they can make the data downloadable, can put it through AI and say, okay, all these people look like they got same, just like I described before, same name on the lease or same on the rent roll, 20% increase in rents. It's supposed to be rent control. How did that happen? And so, there can, so someone could actually do that themselves. But if there's no one, they don't have the staff to investigate it, I don't know. To me, I'm sure the people at the housing department wouldn't want that. They're going to get way too many.
Too much work.
Yes, they're not staffed enough to do the work that they're supposed to do now.
That's crazy. So they're overwhelmed significantly.
Oh yeah. There's no question about it. And that's just the nature, but it's the nature of the politics. It's like, we're going to enact it. We're going to have the press conference. We're going to show what we're doing for tenants, and then the housing department will figure it out. I think that's basically how it all works. And then if they don't have, but there's funding issues, and we have more funding issues, this year and the coming years.
They want an AI programmer to go in there and be like, hey, here, give me the data. Here you guys go. Here's this automated system that, they have all the data. It's so easy now with the way that we're headed with the manipulation. You don't have to be a genius to be able to build these kind of systems. It's like, wow, we could be so much more efficient.
I have, and my thought on that, by the way, is that yes, with new technology, we should be able to do also other things. I mean, theoretically, if you think about what the rent control law is, it's a blunt instrument that doesn't look at income as a factor, but it benefits everybody. Now, if you ask even tenant advocates, they're interested in protecting low-income tenants. They're not interested in wealthier protecting, but yet it protects everybody. It's a blunt instrument. In the old days, there was no way to be able to use any other system because it was too onerous. Now, though, and frankly, with COVID, we've had a huge amount of income verifications, right? People didn't get the rent subsidy if they weren't a certain income. So we have a whole new system that has been set up. If you integrate AI into the whole thing, just like we now have with application processing and things like that, I mean, there's an opportunity to have some form of help for the people who deserve the help, but not others, that could theoretically create a benefit to the apartment owners who are currently subsidizing people who really are not low income.
I mean, I've heard the stories of the doctors, the lawyers, or the high net worth individuals, whatever, who live in a rent controlled property in Beverly Hills, for example, but somewhere in the city of West Hollywood, other areas, high net worth areas, neighborhoods where they're paying, $1,500 for a 3-bedroom unit. And it's just like, they don't need to have the rent control if you're trying to give them or give people. Yeah, it's a blunt object instrument that I don't think they've thought through how they could actually implement some of the strategic strategies for helping the people they want to help versus really not giving it the thought or giving a blanket program that affects everyone.
Right, and up till now, it didn't make the most sense if you're going to try to do that. But now we have new tools, so we need to look at that.
Yeah. What I don't know if you thought about this or anything, but I know because the Olympics are coming, and 2028 has been a big push to revitalize, quote unquote, Los Angeles. Have they said anything to you about what they're planning on doing there, or has that impacted you at all in terms of ownerships or directions or anything like that?
No, I don't know too much. I mean, you can imagine that they're going to be focusing on visible homelessness in and around, especially the locations.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that,
not much.
Nothing that I'm aware of. Yeah.
So we talked about ULA a little bit. We talked about the difficulties developing. You shared a very surprising stat with me that I found very insightful, that over 70% of the buildings in Los Angeles are 5 units and below. Is that true?
Yeah, I think it was like 73% are like 5 units and small, and then like 80-something% are 10 units and smaller. Like we're the second largest city in the United States, and yet if you look at the apartment layout, it's dominated by these smaller apartment buildings. It's not. It's so different from Manhattan. It's so different from most major cities around the world. And so, so that's, it is, I think, was surprising for me when I first heard about it. And then, and just to see the data, it's, even just the number of duplexes is significant.
And they're seeming to change a lot of the rules in terms of what you can build on these sites. where they're protecting a lot of these residential areas, which isn't necessarily inherently bad. However, I think it restricts a ton of potential areas or potential properties that could have much more density, much more housing, much more opportunity to include and get private investors or the current investors to want to develop, right? Because there's more land value there, or there's a higher opportunity cost for them to want to take on the risk of doing this development. Have you looked at the new CHIP program at all? Have you looked at where the zoning and the changes, or do you have thoughts on the zoning in LA?
Yeah, I mean, I have thoughts, and in fact, so the city's reacting to this California housing element requirement, which every 5 years each city has to show how they're going to upzone to allow for a certain number of units. In fact, I was not in this one, but I think 10 years ago, I was actually on the city side of the housing element, part of this cross, representing apartment owners, but a bunch of different interest groups and on how we're going to do it at the time. So I'm very familiar with the process. So, but upzoning doesn't necessarily result in actual units being built, and so the question will remain, even though, will there be enough incentives to upzone? And my sense is, since a lot of the focus on this, recent city of LA is to, like you said, avoid the single family areas and focus more on commercial corridors, which I think, as retail weakens and the ability, and the state law has allowed for redevelopment of those, then I think those are the easiest in my mind. Busier streets, be able to build there. They typically accessible to transit of some kind, and they're already busy. But the second most interesting place is in the multifamily areas, the R3, R4 zones in our city. And but you're not. Why aren't we seeing a lot of development in those areas? It's not because the rents aren't high enough. It's not just because of the cost of development. It's the fact that we have to make the existing tenants whole in a way that I think goes way beyond reasonableness. Again, this is no longer in the middle. So the thing that really bothers me about when you take down a rent stabilized apartment building, I do believe that that people have the right, they're good, who are there, that's no fault of their own, that the owner decided to take it down, that they should be made whole. They should have upfront compensation, as they have right now for and if you're if you're older, or you have if you have disability, all of those things where you have a stepped up amount of an amount, I think that's proper compensation. You can argue the dollar amounts, but the philosophy of paying someone for the inconvenience of moving out, I'm in favor of that. I'm also in favor of this idea that you have to make them whole, meaning they should be able to provide or find an apartment in the, within a certain radius where they lived before, if they want to at the similar rate, so that we protect tenants in that way. And we can create, there's not enough systems, but, we could probably create a system that allows them to have some form of a voucher to make up the difference between maybe what they're paying in their existing building where they're being asked to leave, and the new building. And that, it should be part of the cost that the developer pays. I think that's reasonable. But then to ask those people, allow them to come back into your brand new building with, maybe 3 times the rent for a similar unit, that to me goes beyond what's reasonable, because we just need to make that person find a similar unit in the same area and give them upfront. That's reasonable to me. Going beyond that, it becomes, it's just a win for the tenant, and in and of itself, it is not just a fairness thing. It actually has a negative impact on the development, and that's my big issue, is that there are deals that are not being made. There are small, 4-unit buildings. We remember how many we have. There are the huge number of 5-unit and smaller buildings that could be taken down and have 20 plus units on there. And they're not being done because it's been so restrictive, or they have so many, costs associated with it, or the labor law, again, the prevailing wage requirements. We need to rethink all of those things so that we can, you're not going to get as much pushback to put a 20-unit apartment building in an area that's already zoned for apartments as compared to in a single family area where they're not used to having apartments and then put a 20-unit apartment. So it's much easier even politically for the city council members to approve it, but they're not being built. Like I talked about before, the market's super efficient. You create the right incentives, you create the right rules. We should be taking down a large number of these smaller buildings, making those tenants whole, and figuring out a system how to do that so that we can increase the number of units that we have in our city in the multifamily area. And I'm sure there's a ton of people who are developers, who are peers, who would be happy to build.
Take the risk and to build and do that. What I'm curious to know, from you've been doing this for 20 plus years, what advice, or if you were starting over from scratch, right, you had to come do the American dream, what would you do? And would LA be the place to do it, or where would you look for opportunities?
I think right now, things are dynamic, so things can change and opportunities can change. If you found the right submarket, or some place where you're just getting a great deal, you should still buy in LA. Just know what you're getting into. But as a general rule, I think there are more innovative programs that have occurred in the affordable area where things are getting fast tracked. They're trying to lower some of the costs of developing, or to be able to buy. If there's programs, especially that get developed, where you can buy and then you can convert them to affordable units, but still make a nice return. To me, that would be, there may be some opportunities there. There are people who are taking advantage of the ED1 program, and I know people who are building on the West Side using ED1. So there's something interesting about it. If people, it's not just in South LA or East LA or North Valley. They're developing these units. They're going to build affordable units even where it historically has been difficult to do. If they're able to do that, they need to. That there could be some good opportunities there. So I think it's worth looking into all of the those kinds of programs that. So that may be, at least today, maybe the more interesting kinds of deals or opportunities.
I know Section 8 has been a little bit of with the ED1, because I don't know if you've heard this, but I recently heard that the city is changing up Section 8 in terms of either the rent amounts that they're giving vouchers to, or the rent, fair market rent values, right? I know a lot of ED1 builders were planning an underwriting where their units were going to have a certain amount of rent from Section 8. Like, that was what they were banking on, which is the government subsidized housing. Do you think that Section 8 and that program and things like that are going to continue to fuel that expansion? Or do you think that there's potentially some risks associated with, banking on Section 8 and banking on these government subsidized rent programs?
Well, first of all, anyone who had Section 8 tenants during COVID, we're very grateful to have it, because when things go bad and to have the government backing, that was good. I will also say that the FMR, as the fair market rents, gets calculated by the housing authority for various areas are quite high. So there, people who are taking advantage of Section 8 in some areas are getting some very solid rents, and we need to make that. And there's still a bureaucracy, there's still additional rules, but if you make if you have a payment, a monthly payment that you can count on, Yes, you may be doing some repairs that you might not have done otherwise. Yes, maybe some bureaucratic things, but you're getting a strong rent and probably low turnover, and so you're getting enough benefit. So I believe they have done thus far, which has been quite aggressive with FMRs, has been a great thing. And despite that, you didn't see any significant increase. In fact, there's some small decreases of landlord participation in the Section 8 program in the city. So despite that, and despite these a new law, I think now 3 or 4 years old, that made it illegal to discriminate based on source of income, which would protect Section 8 voucher holders, we still saw a decrease in landlord participation in the Section 8 program. So the idea that they would lower FMR potentially, to me, is a little scary. And that will not be good for at least for the Section 8 program, where they you try that are used by the private market. Because that not only will the developers who are maybe taking advantage of ED1, like you mentioned, but there's another issue, which is landlords will not participate in Section 8. People are on the wait list for over 4 years already. And so to get it, once
get a voucher?
To get a voucher, once you have a voucher, many of them are not able to use them.
Interesting.
So only half the people who get a voucher, I think there's about half, are able to actually find a place in the area that they want, at the rent that they want, despite the fact that they're only paying a third of their 30% of their income towards rent. So
that's interesting. So there's plenty of tenants who have the voucher that can go and live to fill up these Section 8 units. It's just because I've heard that it's actually slowed down in terms of it's harder to fill these units with Section 8 tenants. Like, it's taking longer and longer, or the rents, you got to reduce the rents to be able to, you're not getting the FMR kind of rents.
Oh yeah. I'm not sure. I'm not a Section 8 provider. In fact, while I was commissioner, I was not allowed to.
Got it.
Even if I wanted to.
Got it. Okay. Very interesting. Well, I want to end on more of a positive note and talk about some of the work that you're doing with this Boyle Heights Synagogue, and tell me a little bit about that and what we should be looking out for. And it sounds very promising and exciting.
Yeah. Well, I like civic, being involved in our community and in different ways. So certainly the housing authority was a great way for me to give back using my housing skills. But for a very long time, I've been involved with the Breed Street Shul project, which was the largest synagogue west of Chicago between World War I and World War II.
Wow.
It was a real center for the Jewish community at a time when Boyle Heights was very diverse. Many people who were, including the Jewish community, where they were redlined out of other communities. So there was Japanese, there was Armenian, there were African American. So there was multiple communities that were there by default, necessarily, but it was a real nice melting pot, where you had Latinos and Jews and Japanese, especially, having a lot of daily interaction together. And now it's primarily working class Latino area, after they crisscrossed the area with freeways and the redlining went away. That allowed the Jewish community certainly to move elsewhere. And so this is a project that kind of uses my real estate skills to the development itself is taking the synagogue. There's not much of a Jewish community left there, so it's really to benefit the local Boyle Heights Mexican Latino community, because it's not just Latino, it's primarily Mexican Latino. Boyle Heights has always been the gateway of immigration into the city of LA. It still is in many ways. And so we, like all immigrants, they need services, and people who are working class need services. So the whole basement, which is a light-filled area of this domed, beautiful structure, it's actually the same architect as the Wilshire Boulevard Temple over in Koreatown area. The whole basement is going to be used to create offices, nonprofit offices, to serve the local community with social services and immigration services, English as a second language, all these kinds of things. The sanctuary area will be for performance space or meeting space. So you might have mariachi evening and one night, and the next morning having a bar mitzvah. But yeah, so it's going to be this multi-use. It's also, it'll be large enough to have a large community meeting. So when there's a big issue for Boyle Heights or for that part of the city, they can have a large venue to have the community come out. And then a very interesting part of it that celebrates Boyle Heights as this gateway of immigration is to have some form of exhibit space or museum space that tells the story of all those different groups that I mentioned. Yes, the Mexican and the Jewish, but also the Japanese, Armenian, African American, all of the different experiences that of all these immigrants that have made LA so rich, telling their story. In LA, we don't tell a lot of historical stories, but this will be a great place to be able to do it when you have a sense of place and a place where we really have a lot of history. And so because we were fortunate enough to get $15 million from the state during COVID to redevelop it after it has been basically fenced off for decades.
Mm-hmm.
It was one of the few, maybe the only brick building that was not structurally reinforced. That was required back in the 1980s.
Jeez.
The Dorothy May and all of those.
Yeah.
So
a lot of work.
Not done. And so the thing's been red tagged ever since the Silmar earthquake and fenced off. And now we just finished using this $15 million. We're finishing the first part, which is this to put the structural reinforce the building, and that's all being done. But then the fun part starts, and so we will now make this building alive again and alive really for the benefit of the Boyle Heights community, and to be able to use some of my real estate skills to help is a real honor, and I just can't wait for it to be done and being used again after decades of being underused.
I'm excited to come see it when it's finished. Dan, thank you very much for coming on. I appreciate everything you shared, and I hope people got a little bit of insights into what's going on and understanding the landscape of Los Angeles. And people are working hard to solve these issues, and we need people like you continuing to do great work and helping us get there. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, and anyone else who's listening who wants to get involved, please get involved. We need more apartment owners to be involved and be part of the solution.
Absolutely. Dan, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed the podcast, it would mean the world to me if you could rate us 5 stars on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. It really helps us get our name out there and helps us get fantastic people like our guests to share their insights and knowledge with you. Again, my name is Taylor Avakian. I specialize in the sale of apartment buildings in Los Angeles and Southern California, and I look forward to sharing more of these conversations with you. See you in the next one.